Hi there, my name is Tharik Hussain, and I am one of the individuals working on the Rebelah project through the University of Nottingham. And I'm here to talk to you about heritage trails and how they allow us to unearth unauthorized and neglected history. And to do this, I'm going to talk to you about two different heritage trails that I've worked on. The first one is set in Britain, where I developed two trails to highlight Britain's neglected Muslim history, and then the second one is the pilot trail that we have developed as part of the Rebelah project, set in Amsterdam, to highlight some of the city and the Netherlands Muslim heritage there. I'm going to give you a brief overview of both trails, and then I'm going to summarize towards the end why trails are useful and how you might go about developing them yourselves. So let's start with Britain's Muslim heritage trails. And the first one that I developed is known as the Woking Trail. And as you can see, what we did was we created this map here with a considerable amount of literature. And the purpose of this particular trail was to really bring to the surface and make visible three particular sites in and around the town of Woking in Surrey, England. Now, we felt these three particular sites were immensely significant to Britain's cultural narrative, but had been largely ignored by what you might call the authorized state historical narrative. These sites and the stories connected to them, for example, do not appear in any of the British historical curriculums, and even Muslims largely know nothing about them in Britain. So this was an opportunity to create to create maps and create a trail that would allow people of all walks of life to come and engage with the free spaces. And the free spaces we're talking about here are, first of all, we have in chronological order the what was known as the Mohammedan Cemetery, established in 1884, and effectively the very first Muslim cemetery in Britain and in northwestern Europe. And then we have up here in the top left-hand corner the Shah Jahan Mosque, and the Sir Salayung Memorial Hall next to it. And the mosque was the very first purpose-built mosque in Britain and northwestern Europe, and was completed in 1889. And then finally over here we have what was then known as the Woking Muslim War Cemetery, when it was completed in 1915. Today it's known as the Peace Gardens, and it was the very first war cemetery for Muslim soldiers fighting for the British in World War One and World War Two. We plotted these free spaces on a map. We explained how to get between them, and here we provided literature to contextualize each space and why it was of significance. We also threw in some lighter, kind of interesting and funny facts about each space, to kind of make the trail and the experience quite a light thing, which wasn't easy to do because we were dealing with some dense history here. But we made a concerted effort in both trails to make sure the language was language that was accessible and easy for anybody with a good grasp of English. Now, these maps we printed out. They're huge maps that were printed out and made freely available as part of the project, which was funded by a lottery fund in the UK. And then we placed the maps in various important spaces connected to each of the spaces on the maps here. Now, that was the first of two trails. The second trail focuses on one of the spaces in the first trail, and that is the historic Muslim cemetery. And we wanted to focus on this particular space because we identified that there are a number of individuals buried there who are significant to the British Muslim story. And again, these are individuals that do not make the kind of authorized national historical curriculums. They're not spoken about in any kind of popular forums. And we felt it was important to make their stories visible and also allow people to go and find their final resting place, and in doing so engage with them in a way that they wouldn't otherwise do. So some of the individuals that are buried there include one of the earliest converts known as Abdullah Quilliam, who was actually also responsible for founding the country's very first mosque, not the Woking one, but a house mosque in Liverpool, just prior to the Woking one being completed in 1887. It's the cemetery is also the final resting place of aristocrats like Lord Headley, who converted to Islam and played a huge role in making the Woking Mosque in particular flourish. It's also where the famous Quran translator Marmaduke Pictor is buried, as well as one of the last Ottoman princesses who was buried there with her mother. And of course, in exploring this, it also brings up questions about the connection between the British and the Ottoman Empire. The cemetery isn't just the final resting place of historical figures. Because it's an active cemetery to this day and has modern Muslim plots as well, it's also where people like Dame Zaha Hadid, the very famous Iraqi British architect, is buried, who passed away in 2016. One of the great coups of the development of the cemetery was the discovery that it is also the final resting place of an individual known as Princess Musbah Haidar, who turns out to be directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad. So this was a great coup, and of course also highlights the kind of nuggets that remain and within these neglected narratives and neglected histories and heritages. Now, if we move from the British example, we can then see how that framework was moved over to the Dutch pilot trail that we created, which has 4 stops, and it's all set in and around East Amsterdam. We wanted it to be set there because we felt like it was, this offered spaces that were within close walking distance. We wanted to make it a walking trail that could easily be moved between by participants who would go from stop to stop to learn the context and listen to stories about each space, allowing them to engage in discussions prompted by questions. Each space is there for specific reasons. The stop 1 is a place where there are 2 mosques under one roof. One of the mosques has been founded by the local Moroccan community, the other by the Turkish community. This is a highly unusual type of setup where the 3 cultures come together, but they also have communal areas, and the space offered this wonderful blend of Eastern and Western architecture. Stop 2, on the other hand, takes the visitors into some uncomfortable territory. It's a monument right next to where the Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh was murdered by someone professing to be a Muslim. And so this is a stop that allows the engagement with some uncomfortable heritage, being the murder, of course, of Van Gogh and his films, which upset many Muslims in the Netherlands and beyond. The third stop, again, is an uncomfortable stop in many ways. It's the Tropen Museum, which began life as a colonial museum where many of the artifacts that were taken from Dutch colonial territories were kept. And of course, in engaging with some of these artifacts at the museum, it it will allow participants to have discussions about the link between colonialism and Muslim cultures abroad. And finally, we wanted to end somewhere that allowed the visitors to really engage with the modern Dutch Muslim community in Amsterdam, in a place where there are many Dutch Muslim businesses. This offered an opportunity to actually go and visit some of these businesses, potentially eat in the restaurants, and of course meet the people, talk to them, and have an immersive experience. So that's really the two trails, and I'm sure you can see the framework from that was, apparent in the first one that we took across to the second one. But why are trails such good, tools to highlight diverse narratives and perspectives? Well, they allow these narratives and perspectives to become visible and accessible in ways that other mediums just don't. But I think one of the most amazing things about them, and one of the most successful things about them, is that it gets people to physically engage with the heritage in a way that a book or a documentary or a video just does not do. It also allows for an opportunity for dialogue and discussion, but also in engaging the communities, the host communities, in their development, it also allows them to take ownership of the heritage and development. In both examples, in the British and the Dutch, we engaged with the local Muslim communities, and they were part of the process in identifying the heritage and in developing them. In both cases, we also collaborated with a number of diverse institutes, and of course, these non-authorized narratives surface through these trails in a way that you might not see when engaging with other mediums. The trails create a sense of belonging because of the fact that people who are developing them connect their identities with physical places in a way that they might not have experienced before. It also, again, as previously mentioned, challenges the accepted and authorized narratives, and of course unearths the invisible. Now, trails are also hugely significant to educational settings, because as well as highlighting the alternative and other heritages in a way that their curriculums might not already do, the trails can actually become active learning tools. And whether that's because schools and educational institutes actually immerse themselves in the trails and experience them by going and actually doing the trails, or as in the case of the British example, many local madrasas and universities have actually used the literature that was produced as part of their learning activities. Now, to finish off, I'm just going to try to briefly point out some of the key areas when it comes to knowledge and research that might be needed in order to create a trail. This, of course, is not comprehensive, but it's just to offer an overview. Now, it's obvious, I'm sure, from having listened to the description of the two trails we created, that some knowledge of the heritage in these areas is necessary so that you understand the potential. In other words, you need to know that there is another story to be told. And then the research that is carried out in and with the community will allow that story to be told in the way you want it to be told. So research is significant with the community. And therefore, guidance and sensitivity is also important. Heritage, identity, all of these things, they evoke quite strong emotions, and it's very, very important to allow the people who see it as their heritage to be a part of the process and allow them to guide those who wish to develop these trails, because they will know best the sensitivities and the potential challenges that lie ahead. And so, that engagement with the host community is super important for the guidance and sensitivity, but also because they become potential sources for the research that you will need to do in order to really enrich the trails. In both cases, it's interviews with locals, it's carrying out research on the places and the spaces, both in a kind of academic sense, but also through the discussions with local people, that really allows the spaces to come to life on in the trail, and really allows them to be contextualized within the lives of the local communities in a way that isn't seen in the more authorized examples of the histories of these spaces. So I think it's quite apparent that one of the most significant aspects of developing trails is to make sure that the host communities, so to speak, are on board as part of the process. That's probably the biggest takeaway, that you hopefully comes from this particular explanation. So that's my brief overview of trails and how they help to bring to the surface and make visible the kind of narratives that are normally neglected and overlooked by the mainstream. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you find that useful. Thank you.